So that's how that came about.
Yeah, that's how we met, and then...
So as we both said, both PhD students, so I think it's, as we said, we want to talk about science and more specifically what we're interested in. I think we should talk about...
You do you first, let's hear about your
about
PhD.
Me first, right? So my research itself is focused on using like machine learning. So machine learning, for those who don't know, is ways in which... So it's different methods and algorithms. I'm sure everyone's heard of the word algorithm before.
Yeah, man.
So it's how machines can take information or bits of data and learn and perform a task of some kind. So my application is in healthcare, more specifically like heart data. So I work with data generated from a medical test called a electrocardiogram.
Fancy,
very fancy. Yeah, so an ECG for sure. I call it an ECG because I'm not going to sit here calling it an electrocardiogram. I'll get me tongue tied. So that
every few seconds, electrocardiogram,
honestly, like was it red lottery? Actually, I can't.
Red lottery. Yeah,
how do you say it, lad?
Yeah, me neither.
So the way that works, you have like leads, like little electrodes, things that record the electrical activity of the heart, and it records it on a bit of paper. So now I'm applying machine learning to that. So that's the input, that's the data the machine. So
that collects your data, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the machine is basically trying to learn from those electrical signals generated from the electrodes attached to your heart. So currently the applications we're working with, we've got athletes. So we're looking at basically modelling athletes. So what their healthy athletes' hearts look like, because the thing you've got with athletes, well, from my very limited knowledge of healthcare and how the heart works, is that obviously everyone knows go gym, lift big weights, get big muscles.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing kind of happens with the heart, yeah. Right. So if
eat protein,
you just eat lots of protein.
Protein shakes, go to the gym.
That's the only bit of advice you've ever given me. eat protein. But yeah, so to pump all the blood around the heart, which all these athletes need to do, all these elite training and hard training, the heart has to get stronger as well. So the heart gets thicker and changes. So from my
it's a muscle, isn't it? Like any muscle, it grows when you're exercising.
So from my understanding and stuff is like it can be hard sometimes. So you have two different types of changes. So you have stuff that happens naturally from the changing. That's called physiological changes. Yeah. So that means stuff that's happening naturally and helps your body.
So it would happen to non-athletes as well, could you say?
Yeah, so it happens to everyone. So pathological changes, things that happen naturally
as you age,
as a response to certain things.
Okay.
Whereas then you have your second type of change, which is pathological. So that's the sort of stuff that is caused by disease, which can cause issues and stuff like that. Yeah. So what can happen sometimes with athletes is that when the hearts develop and get thicker and change, it can mask some of it. So it can mask pathological changes, so the bad changes, so it makes it hard to spot them. And that's sometimes when you see, like, when athletes just like, so they go through lots of pre-participation screening, so they have scans all the time to make sure they're healthy and that, but sometimes it can be missed just because it's hard to pick up sometimes. It's a very rare occurrence, but it's different in that. So say if you're working with cancers, the reason you'd work with cancer is because it's high impact, it affects everyone, but as you say, it's everywhere as well. With athletes, it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does happen, it's like a very
so is athlete's heart then, right?
Event.
Is that different from what we're seeing at the moment, like with cardiac arrest, or is that like a link to cardiac arrest of athletes?
It could be like a whole host of problems. So athlete's heart is the term given to the heart, the changes that occurred due to these extreme conditions and regimes you have to go through to perform at the top level.
And you're saying that those changes that happen to athletes' heart
could mask. That's the problem. Yeah.
What are they masking? Physiological changes.
Pathological.
Changes.
So disease changes caused by heart disease.
So infections basically happen in the heart, like heart disease, it's harder to detect because these hearts have changed because of the exercise. So and then obviously not all exercise causes hearts to change in the same way, as not all weight training programs cause the same muscle development. It depends on what they're eating, how they're living.
Mo Farah, for example, a long distance runner, will have different changes and adaptations to Eddie. Is it Eddie Hall?
Yeah, the strong man.
Yeah, the strong man.
And he'd have different ones to a rower, to
of course,
basketball
because you all need different things. So the idea behind what we want to do is we want to use a type of algorithm, so a type of machine learning called like clustering.
Yeah, man.
So the idea is it takes all these scans and bits of information and then creates a point in like a 2D plot. So it's like a map. So then you group like athletes together and then you can see what sports and what type of... So is there a difference between race, between sexes, on how the heart develops and stuff like that. So then the idea is you can give that map to people who work in that field and then they'll know what a healthy heart looks like.
Yeah.
So then if someone comes in, they don't land where they're supposed to on the map.
What a healthy athlete heart looks like. Or what a healthy
what a healthy athlete heart looks like.
Because a healthy athlete heart is different from just a healthy...
Of course, yeah. There is differences. So, for example, everyone knows the common thing with cyclists, where their resting heart rate's like 4.
Super low. Yeah, like -20.
It's like it doesn't beat. Yeah. It doesn't beat at all.
Every minute. That's enough blood forever. Yeah.
Like, so it's those type of things.
Okay.
And then another one is we're working with the hospital in Bath to predict some other disease, pulmonary hypertension.
Going back to the athlete's heart then, so when you do this clustering and when you're finding these clusters, what type of like properties of the clusters or variables we call them?
So
like, what would sort of characterise a cluster?
So the idea,
what are the expected results?
So the idea is so we've collected. So the idea is the clusters we made simply just on the signals from the heart. So we don't want to. So it's called like in machine learning, it's like biases. You obviously add to the data whereby you add information that allows the model to learn something like easier in a way. So we want it to learn just from the ECG signal and then create its clusters. And then to understand what the clusters are saying, we've got information such as the sex of the athlete, the race, the height, weight, the sport they play, the position of sport they play. And I think that's important because even within a sport, so say we've got rugby league players, right? A prop forward is a massively different job to a winger. Massively different. So,
and in other sports, the changes aren't as big, are they?
No, so like to say for football, for example, like
there's less differentiation.
Like NFL would be another huge one where you look at the people who stand on the O line and the D line compared to safeties and
or if you just had the sport athletics or track and field, within that you've got people who are sprinting and you've got 10,000 metre runners, marathon runners and shot buzzers.
So it makes so we've got cyclists as well, so there's a difference between sprint cyclists, endurance cyclists. So I thought that was a key thing that we wanted to include. So we've got all these points and the idea is we'll see what is like prevalent in each group. So we'll say maybe there's a group of points at the top, they're popular with prop forwards or really tall football players or like those type, and then at the bottom left it could be wingers, and that goes for rugby league.
So what is the end game if you find like... Sorry, I'm interrogating right now.
That's all right.
What is the end game?
It's good practice.
If you find... good practice for your Viva. Do not fail. Now, what happens? So then, say if you find these clusters, you've used your athlete's heart data on these heart signals, and you find, okay, this is what a healthy heart looks like, and this is a cluster with what we think has more unhealthy hearts, a greater proportion of unhealthy hearts, and sort of the properties of it mean that there's a lot of, for example, shot putters.
Yeah.
So you find that result, okay, this cluster has these properties, there's a lot of shot putters who have this type of heart. What's the next step? So you've done that work. How do you help those shot putters
the idea
have hearts that we can't sort of identify these pathogens in?
So the idea is that we don't have any unhealthy individuals.
Okay.
So what we're doing is, because it's so rare. It's so rare. So the different tack, as you were, like the different approach, is to instead try and classify who's healthy and not healthy. Well, you do it as kind of an anomaly detection type of model. So the idea is, once you've got this map, right, of where it's all healthy athletes, and then you're happy that, like, of where everyone is. So say you have a group of points at the top, and people in that are athletes, say over 6 foot, weigh, I don't know, over 100 kilos, like prop forward, second rows, rugby league, big lads at the top. The reason I say that is we don't have any female rugby league data.
Okay.
But then say you get another rugby league player, male, scan him in, and he doesn't land in the cluster at the top. Maybe he lands in a cluster with, like, say, where the midfielders are in football. Why is his heart different to everyone else's. And then that doesn't necessarily say there's anything wrong. What that does is it allows like the flagging of a potential issue for further investigation and further tests.
Yeah, so as you say, then if this certain type of sports person doesn't sort of fit with other people of that sport, if he fits with a different sort of grouping,
exactly,
it could still be a healthy heart. But what's that allowing you and your research group to do is to say it more than likely is healthy, but there's more of a possibility that it isn't healthy because this rugby player has got a heart similar to a long distance runner.
It's like, so why is there a difference? And it could be then the reason there's a difference is because he's fell in a different part of the map.
Yeah,
the difference is caused by something unnatural. As you say, it could be something natural, and then obviously the thing with the data is the more data you get, you need to expand your model and update your learnings. But then that would be, hopefully the idea is where you create this anomaly detection so it allows people to be put forward for future tests rather than just try and massively test everyone type thing. So
and if you have got it, people. And if this type of technology does end up, for example, at a rugby club where they've got this information, if they are doing heart scans and they find one of their players has got a different sort of property with their heart to other players, they can go, okay, let's do more tests, let's keep an eye on this person, and that's okay, cool, man.
And then like we have different things, so we have multiple scans for the same athlete in different years, so there's potential for future work in
watching how the heart changes over time. Of course,
so there's all sorts of potential, so that's kind of where the vast majority of my efforts have gone so far.
Yeah, man.
My first paper published the other week.
Tell them what it's called.
It is Machine Learning and the Athlete's Hearts. I can't even remember the fucking name.
It's that long you can't remember it.
The current gaps and potential for future implementation.
We'll do it. Like next few weeks we'll do a podcast on sort of some of the work in more detail. Hopefully get a guest on as well that has expertise, for example, in athlete's heart.
Yeah, so that's the idea. So that's what I've been working on. So it's interesting in that it's good because we've got this methodological approach, which we hope to aim to develop and create new methodologies, new algorithms. But the application's interesting, which always helps. That I found is if you do something that's boring, even if you find the method of doing it interesting, if your output's boring, it really affects like your ability to get out of bed and get going. To do it. So you know what? I've spoke for ages there. Enough about me. That sound.
Does anyone hear that noise then?
Honestly, right outside this pub, there's like a sign above it. Just above the window there, like an old like metal creaky sign, and every time the wind picks up it sounds like a horror film. Gets me every time. Right, back to what I was actually talking about. So Sam, your PhD, so what is it that you work on and been spending most of your time on recently?
Yeah, it's funny, like we've ended up doing, so I'm at University of Liverpool, Ryan's at John Moore's, but we've ended up doing quite similar PhDs,
it is
but
weird,
also got very different applications. But so my research is in something called multimorbidity. So I've talked to you about it a few times, but just to tell people, it's basically when a person has two or more health problems, so that are long term, so that could be diabetes and a cancer, could be a mental health condition like depression and anxiety. It's just when a person has two or more health problems, and it's only really become like an evident problem over the last 10-20 years, and it's because populations are just living longer. We're all living longer, living more healthy lives.
You get more time to develop more things.
More conditions. There's a lot of conditions which are old age conditions, like Alzheimer's and but as people get older, you know, the general pattern is people age, and as people age, they tend to pick up more problems, more health problems, especially if they're not living well and eating well. They pick up, or they live in a deprived area, they tend to pick up more problems. But over time, it can really compound on someone, create a great burden on the individual, because they might have 2 or 3 conditions. So say for example, a person might have diabetes, depression and a type of cancer. Now they've got to manage 3 different treatment regimens, and then you've got the burden that produces on the local community health service like primary care, and then also,
especially if one set of multimorbid like groupings is present in one area, it can really tax a certain like.
So there's certain conditions which are more prevalent in deprived areas, or just have a weird pattern in an area. So like, I don't know, acute conditions can pop up more in a certain city than another city, and if there's so that's sort of like the premise of the PhD is multimorbidity. It's looking into that, and similar to Ryan, I'm using clustering algorithms. So we're in the same sort of. I'm always ringing Ryan saying, "How does this work?" But
and it's good though that we're both on it, because as we kind of spoke about before, like it gives that kind of. Because we both want to achieve the PhD, it gives like the
shared sort of effort,
like a shared knowledge pool on if we're working on a model. Should we use that? Is that relevant? How do you use it? It's something to bounce off other than just Google and Stack Overflow.
Google. Or now ChatGPT. What's it called?
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT.
That's
just ask it.
Future episode.
Yeah, proper ask it anything. Make me tea. It'll pop out the computer and make you dinner.
Just make me a sarnie.
But yeah, so using clustering algorithms, but my PhD's so looking at this notion called multimorbidity, but it's much more got like a social science aspect as well. Yeah. So the idea is we want to find using unsupervised machine learning algorithms, both hard and soft clustering methods, to find what are the main cluster patterns in a population, focusing on the Liverpool and Cheshire area. And then we want to find out as well, what are the sorts of socio-demographic patterns of those clusters? Is a cluster more likely to be deprived of lower nutrition, of, greater proportion of people smoking? Is another cluster more likely to pop up in an affluent area with higher income? And so on and so forth. And we also want to understand which cluster is associated with which health services. So there might be a pattern to a certain cluster produces individuals or has patients in it, not produces them, the patients belong to those clusters, which are more likely to interact with primary care services. Certain clusters
what's a primary care service?
So a primary care service, come on, catch up, right, is like a GP. Any community care. So like if you've got a bad tooth or toothache, you go to the dentist, but that's
I've not been to the dentist in about 8 years.
The Ryan's yellow teeth are staring at me.
As soon as I went to uni, as soon as I had to pay, I went, you can fuck that up.
As soon as I had to buy my own toothpaste when I left me Mars.
Yeah, I've not brushed my teeth in 12 years.
Nah, so primary care, if you've got an earache, you go to your local GP. It's general information to care for you. You get a prescription to look after that condition, and hopefully you'll get better. And you've got secondary care, which is stuff like a hospital. So it could be an elective appointment at a hospital where you're going for a surgery, or it could be just an emergency, not an appointment, you've turned up, an emergency admission, so something's went wrong with you, maybe you've had a heart attack, felt really unwell, you need urgent service, you can't contact your GP. She ends up going to an emergency service. So the clusters we're trying to find using these algorithms have these certain demographic and health service use patterns, but in the long run, that will really help benefit, one, prevention of conditions, and two, the allocation of resources in certain areas.
To help tackle it better.
So around the prevention side of things, if we can identify, 5 or 6 major clusters in the Liverpool area, and we know that certain swathes of people are more likely to end up with these clusters, then we can start tackling routes to prevention. If a person has diabetes and asthma, and there's a common cluster in the area with diabetes, asthma and depression, well then we know that person might have a higher chance now of ending up with depression because
they've got the two other things.
They've got the other two conditions in that cluster, the algorithm has told us that this cluster is popular in this area.
So the idea can be then if you pass that on to like different trusts and stuff, they can target preventative care,
bringing out preventive strategies to say, okay, how do we stop individuals that follow the diabetes asthma pathway ending up with the depression and then anxiety as well on top of that. Because the more conditions that people have, it's within their health services' interest to stop them getting them. Because the more they have, the more they turn up, the more money they end up spending on them. And it's in their interest as well because they have a better
quality
life.
Of life.
They're not always managing these conditions.
Because as you say, it's the whole thing, isn't it? It's better to prevent something than to try and cure
let it happen.
So to be able to spot potential people on a potential path and try and cut that.
It's much easier to treat someone with 1 or 2 conditions than it is to let them end up with 6, 7, 8, 9 and then try and treat them then.
One
of the big issues in the area as well, right, is like this, the healthcare system at the moment is set up for singular disease treatment.
Oh, so I'll go in for, I don't know, like arthritis on my knee, but not like anything else I've got wrong with the body at the same time.
So so you might turn up to the emergency centre with you know, a heart problem. You've also got arthritis. You've also got bad depression. You've also got, you know, insert any condition here.
Yeah.
So you're on different treatments for all those conditions, but the clinician will treat you just for the problem you've
been admitted
presented, for, which makes sense because it's the most important condition at the moment.
Because it's what's technically brought you there.
Exactly.
However, it could be a combination of all of the things that have brought you,
that have compounded to bring you there. But also, then when you're administrating drugs, if that person's on 5 or 6 other drugs, there's these things called drug-drug interactions and drug-human interactions where you take multiple drugs and, well, you know, you get sick because of it. You've seen you take an antibiotic. If you have alcohol with it,
it's a fun time.
Your interaction in the body, you have some fun times, but your interaction in the body, and you end up feeling worse than you did just with the problem before the antibiotic. That's sort of getting.
All jokes aside, I know exactly what you mean. Like,
no, but that's sort of you know, that's what we're trying to look out for in the multimorbidity sphere. So, but that's outside the premise of my PhD. I'm not getting into prevention. I am just identifying the clusters,
and passing that on to people.
I'm patternating them, finding out the demographic patterns, and so we're quite similar about clustering, man.
It is because
fucking about on a computer, basically.
But I think the unsupervised, so the clustering. So I don't think we mentioned that before. Like, clustering works. Like, clustering algorithms fall under a higher umbrella known as unsupervised machine learning. Now, what that means is you're not telling the computer to learn something. So, something many people are familiar of is like a prediction, where you try and predict if someone's going to buy something or not.
Yeah.
So the model learns there from massive amounts of history of buying patterns and then whether they ended up buying or not. Whereas unsupervised, what you do is you just give it a load of data and you just go, find the pattern for me automatically, like what's going on in that data, and then you make sense of it afterwards by trying to put labels in the clusters.
There's all sorts to like weigh like distances between points, and then as you say, the supervised machine learning is you sort of, I suppose a simple way to say it is, you know what you're looking for before
you go into it, like you're guiding the computer on what to learn, whereas unsupervised is like the computer's trying to learn it itself. But I think there's a real place for it, because if you look at trends and stuff, it's like supervised learning dominated the field for years because it was like let's go out there, let's make prediction. Yeah, in a way, because it's hard. It's hard to monitor like unsupervised learning and stuff, because obviously it learns what it learns, and that is your answer. There is no there's no real. Well, there are tricks and stuff, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like, there's no you're not guiding it to a certain answer. But the stuff it learns can be a lot more powerful, and stuff like that. So I think you're starting to see this trend of unsupervised learning starting to see a bit more of a comeback in.
When I say it's easier, I don't mean easier to carry out. I mean easier to get your head around, because you know what you're sort of like.
Because you can see the output.
You see the output exactly. So if you've got an image and you want to find out, is this image a cat or a dog? You know what you're looking for.
No, of course. So it's like another project I'm working on. They want to make predictions on whether a disease is there or not, but then they also want to know what level of the disease is. Say there's 5 levels of severity. So for that, it makes sense to use 2 different approaches. So you use the supervised approach, do they have the disease or not, and then you use unsupervised approach to create this visual map to see where the prediction falls. So like highs over here, lows up here, mediums in the middle. So it allows people to see visually where that person falls within this massive space of results, and then it gives them a way of interpreting it a bit better. I feel. Now we're delving into model.
Now we've gone over the hill and down it again.
Down again.